The Mantle of Mountain Fury has been fixed, and holy cow, does it hit hard. I'm going to give you my version of this HotAquake build. This is a throwback to Season 2. We're going to be using Whirlwind and Hammer of the Ancients in order to basically have unlimited fury, guarantee your procs of overpower for your Hammer of the Ancients, and then do some massive damage. I'm going to show you a quick pit run so you can see exactly what the gameplay looks like, and then hop into the skills. So that's the run. Let's take a look at the skill tree. Starting at the top, you're going to pick just 2 points into any of the basic skills that's going to unlock your next tier. 1 point into Whirlwind up through Enhanced Whirlwind. This will give us 1 Fury every time that Whirlwind deals damage, or 4 Fury against elites. Whirlwind is going to be used as a source of weapon swapping for us, and we'll get into that when we get into the gameplay loop. 1 point into Hammer of the Ancients, all the way down through Violent Hammer of the Ancients. We're going to guarantee Hammer of the Ancients overpowers through one of the aspects. This is going to be just a big source of damage for us. Hammer of the Ancients doesn't do a lot of damage itself. 3 points into Warpath. This is going to give us additional damage after we guarantee that overpower from Hammer of the Ancients. Ground Stomp all the way up through Tactical Ground Stomp. Ground Stomp is going to be a source of vulnerable damage, fury, stun, and additional earthquakes for us. It's a big one. 3 points into Imposing Presence for 15% maximum life. 3 points into Martial Vigor for some damage reduction against elites. Rallying Cry is going to be our source of Unstoppable. It's also going to be our source of Fortify. If you're getting Fortify from other sources, because there's a lot of different ways to do it, you can move this point over to a Tactical Rallying Cry. That'll give you some Fury generation and some Fury at the same time. We're going to keep it right in Strategic Rallying Cry for this. Outburst and Tough as Nails. These are going to be your source of bleed and thorns, and you can take advantage of some of the nodes in your Paragon board with this. Warcry, all the way down through Power Warcry. If there's at least 6 enemies nearby, you increase the damage bonus of Warcry by 10%. 3 points into Raid Leader. This heals you and your allies for life per second when your shouts are active. 3 points into Booming Voice. This is going to increase the duration of your shouts. And then 3 points into Guttural Yell. This is going to make enemies affected by your shouts deal less damage. 3 points into Pit Fighter. You're going to deal additional damage to close and have some damage reduction. 3 points into Slaying Strikes. You're going to deal 15% increased damage to healthy and injured enemies. Injured enemies are anything below 35% life. Healthy enemies are anything above 80%. 3 points into No Mercy. This is going to give you 9% critical strike chance. If you get your critical strike chance up to 100% and you don't need this, then you can move those points around later on. 1 point into Thick Skin, so you can unlock Counteroffensive. When your Fortify is over 50% of your maximum life, you're going to deal additional damage. We're also going to go into Defensive Stance, 3 points here. While you're fortified, you're going to gain additional damage reduction and heal yourself per second. 3 points into Heavy Hitter. This is the biggest one this season. You can get a lot of ranks here, as you can see. Your ultimate skills, Earthquakes, and Dust Devils are going to deal up to a massive amount of damage. 3 points into Heavy Handed. This is going to give you an increased critical strike damage bonus, whether you're using a two-handed weapon. And then we're going to get Wallop. Bludgeoning weapons are going to give you increased damage against vulnerable enemies. 2 points into Invigorating Fury. You're going to heal yourself every single time that you spend 100 Fury. Swapping back and forth between Hammer of the Ancients and Whirlwind is going to spend a ton of Fury, so you're going to get this all the time. 5 points into Wrath the Berserker, all the way down through Supreme Wrath the Berserker. This is going to give you a source of Unstoppable, a source of Fury generation, and a big boost to your damage. Then finally, we're going to take Unconstrained. This is going to be the final point here. This is going to take your Berserking bonus from 25% damage to 60% damage, and while you're below 65% life, you're going to be Berserking all the time, and you'll have 30% physical damage reduction. For the Paragon board, we're going to be starting at the bottom here with Wrath. This is going to be a huge source of Fury generation. Every single time that you crit, and that includes your Earthquakes, you're going to generate 3 Fury. That's going to get multiplied by all of your other Fury generation. This is also going to give us a multiplicative to your critical strike damage bonus. Coming up, we're going to be going into the Weapon Master board. Swapping weapons grants you 8% of your maximum Fury. You deal 30% increased damage to injured and healthy enemies. When we get into the gameplay loop, I'll show you how to swap weapons and how to take advantage of this, but this is the only way that this build will run. Without that 8% Fury on weapon swap, we will run out of Fury. In this board, we're going to be running Executioner. You're going to deal 15% increased damage while you're wielding a polearm. Polearm is going to be set to your Whirlwind, so we'll be able to take advantage of this buff here. We're also going to get a multiplicative increase to damage. In the next board, we're going to be running Blood Rage. Killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to grant Berserking for 5 seconds. Your damage is increased by 10% of your damage while Berserking bonus, up to a maximum of 45%. But what that means, when you come over to your stats and you scroll down to the bottom, you're going to see your damage while Berserking bonus. Mine is at 448%. You want to try and get as close to 450% as you can. It's going to take 10% of that 450%, and then that's going to give you that 45% as a multiplicative damage increase. So if you go over a little bit, that's okay. It just gives you a little bit of extra additive damage. You want to try not to be under, but we'll show you exactly how to get there when we get into the gear section. In this board, we're going to be running Ire. This is some additional damage while berserking bonus that we can add into that node. We're also going to get 10% reduced damage while berserking from elites, and then a multiplicative damage increase to close enemies. In the next board, we're going to be running Decimator. Each time you make an enemy vulnerable, your damage is increased by 20%. Overpowering a vulnerable enemy grants an additional 20% bonus. Because we're going to guarantee our overpowers, we're going to always have that 40% bonus up. Inside of that board, we're going to be running Rumble. This is going to give us a huge damage increase to your earthquakes. You want to put this glyph into the board that has the most strength so you can get the most out of this. You're also going to deal 10% increased damage to bosses and crowd control enemies for each active earthquake up to 50%. And then your earthquakes are going to get a multiplicative increase to their damage. Moving up, we're going to be going into the Force of Nature board. This works exactly like Blood Rage works. You're going to get 40% of your damage versus close bonus. That's up to a maximum of 200% increased multiplicative damage to your earthquakes. It's a big, big increase. Inside of this board, we're going to be running Martial. After casting a shout, the active cooldowns of every non-shout is going to be reduced by 2 seconds. It's going to reduce the cooldowns of our ultimate, and it's going to reduce the cooldown of Ground Stomp. So that's the Paragon board. Let's take a look at the gear. Starting out, we're going to be running the Ugly Bastard helmet. This is the strongest barbarian helmet out there. It is stronger than Air of Perdition. It is stronger than the Harlequin's Crest. It takes all of our damage while we're berserking, and it converts it into fire damage. And it takes that fire damage and it multiplies it by up to 100% increased damage. It's a huge source of fury generation from Prolific Fury, and it also gives us damage reduction through aggressive resistance. Moving down, we're going to be going with the Mantle of Mountain Fury. This is the one that they just fixed. What this is going to do, it's going to allow Hammer of the Ancients to create a seismic line that's going to deal damage and slow enemies. It shoots out in front of you every time that you hit with Hammer of the Ancients on the ground. Any earthquake that it passes through is going to explode for their total damage, but the earthquakes are going to be consumed. So we're going to have to spawn as many earthquakes as we possibly can in order to make sure that we keep on spawning them so we can keep on making sure that they're blowing up. For the gloves, we're going to be running Fist of Fate. This is just going to be a random chance to deal a ton more damage, and it procs pretty often. For the pants, we're going to be running Bolt's Will. This has a couple different uses. It's going to be a source of fury generation for us because we're going to get 50 primary resources every single time that we become unstoppable. We need maximum resources with a weapon swap build because the Weapon Master board is a percentage of our maximum fury. If our maximum fury is too low, when we swap weapons, we won't be swapping and gaining enough in order to cover the cost of either Hammer of the Ancients or Whirlwind. But we have to make sure that we have enough fury in order to make that 8% worth it. It's also a great source of damage reduction, and the all stats will give us additional strength, which we'll get into later because that's a really important point. For the boots, we're going to be running Yen's Blessing. If you want to swap this out for a regular legendary pair of boots, you can. Make sure you have your resistances under control because it is very difficult to do it without having any of these uniques. This is a great source of fury generation. It's also going to cast any of the non-ultimate, non-mobility skills. So Rallying Cry, Ground Stomp, and War Cry. Once every 8 seconds, Yen's will cast one of those as long as it's on cooldown. For the bludgeoning weapon, we're going to be running Earthquakes. This is where Ground Stomp is going to generate earthquakes for us. While we're standing in an earthquake, and for 4 seconds after we leave that earthquake, we're going to deal 120% increased damage, and our earthquakes are also going to deal 120% increased damage. For the affixes, we're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Critical Strike Damage, and for the tempers, we're going to get some of our damage first close bonus and ranks to Heavy Hitter. Make sure you follow along in the planner. You'll know where to put all the masterwork and crits, what the best stats are, because my gear is definitely not perfect, so I'm still working on getting this set up. For the other weapon, we're going to be running Battle Mad. We're going to gain up to 40% increased damage and berserking for 4 seconds after swapping a weapon 8 times. We will swap our weapons more than 8 times within that 4 seconds. For the affixes, we're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Critical Strike Damage, and for the tempers, we're going to be running Critical Strike Damage bonus and ranks to Heavy Hitter. For the other dual wield weapon, we're going to be running Executioner. Your overpowers will spawn earthquakes once every 4 seconds, so every time that we guarantee that overpower with Hammer of the Ancients, we're going to spawn an earthquake once every 4 seconds. Your earthquake damage is increased by 15% for every 100 strength that you have. That is a huge, huge, huge multiplier. 715% increased damage based on my strength. Now, you can get your strength higher if you get your gear better, so make sure you follow along with the planner and you look at what we're going to be using there. For the affixes, we're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Critical Strike Damage, and then Damage versus Close and ranks to Heavy Hitter for the tempers. For the slashing weapon, again, make sure this is a polearm that you're using. We're going to be running Incendiary Fissures. Your earthquakes are going to deal up to 120% increased damage, and that damage is going to get converted into fire. We're going to have fire damage from our earthquakes here, increased fire damage from the Ugly Bastard helmet. It's a great combination. For the affixes, we're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Critical Strike Damage, This is where you're going to get some of that additional damage while berserking bonus that plays into your Blood Rage node. We're also going to be running Chance for Earthquakes to cast twice here. For the ring, we're going to be running Earth Strikers. After swapping weapon 8 times, your next non-basic skill will overpower. Whirlwind cannot overpower, which means that our next skill that's going to overpower is going to be Hammer of the Ancients. This is how we're forcing our overpower with Hammer of the Ancients to gain that 40% increased damage from Violent Hammer of the Ancients. But we'll be overpowering so often with Hammer of the Ancients that we won't really need to worry about Ground Stomp eating that overpower damage as well. For the affixes here, we're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Critical Strike, Chance. If you have enough Critical Strike Chance, you can swap this out for Attack Speed. Attack Speed is going to allow us to swap back and forth between Hammer of the Ancients and Whirlwind faster. It's not necessarily just how fast you attack, but also how fast you can swap between skills. For the tempers here, we're going to be running either Brawling cooldown to reduce Ground Stomp and Warcry cooldown, or if you want to, I would go with Wrath of the Berserker cooldown and then damage to close. For the other ring, we're going to be running the Ring of Starless Sky. You're spending your primary resources reduces the cost of your skills and increases your damage by up to 50%. It means Hammer of the Ancients and Whirlwind are going to cost 50% less, and then it's going to add up to a 50% multiplier to all of our damage. For the amulet, we're going to be running Bolkathos. We don't have Leap on our bar, but we're not using this for Leap. While standing in an Earthquake, and for 4 seconds afterwards, you gain 30% increased damage reduction. Your Earthquakes are also going to deal 90% increased damage here. For the affixes, we're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Heavy-Handed. If you wanted to go super expensive, you can go with Strength, Heavy-Handed, and then ranks to Pit Fighter. It's going to give you more damage reduction and more damage. You can also throw Counteroffensive on here. There's a lot of different options to do some more damage with your amulet, as long as you're feeling tanky enough. For the tempers here, we're going to be running either Raid Leader, Invigorating Fury, and then Wrath of the Berserker cooldown. For the gems, we're going to be running rubies in our armor for additional strength, because that's going to play into our executioner aspect. We're going to be running critical strike damage bonus with emeralds here in our weapons. And for the occult gems, we're going to be running the Hungering Void. While you have an aura active, which we have one, you can see it around the character here. We're going to be pulling enemies in every 8 seconds. We're also going to be running Duststone. For each aura and hex an enemy is affected by, they're going to take 2% increased damage from you. And for the last one, we're going to be running Friend of the Bog. While you have 3 or more growth and decay witch powers equipped, you're going to gain 8% primary core stat, which is your strength, 10% maximum life, and you're going to be unhindered. If you're using Whirlwind without this in, you actually take a movement speed penalty. Because we're unhindered, we actually don't take that penalty bonus, which is actually pretty cool. So how this works with your witch powers. We have 1, 2, 3 growth and decay. That's going to unlock Friend of the Bog's powers. For the witch powers, we're going to be running Soul Harvest. Whenever you use a cooldown, gain 1% of your primary core stats per surrounding enemy. That bonus lasts for 10 seconds. This is actually kind of bugged, and I'll show you how it's bugged in the gameplay loop, and then how to avoid getting stuck with the bad bonus. We're also going to be running Shaken Soul. This is going to make everything vulnerable anytime that we deal damage. We're going to be dealing damage all the time with our witch powers, so everything will be vulnerable. We're going to be running Hex of Whispers. When you're pushing the pits, but it's going to be a pit pushing build, when you get to the boss room, all of those echoes, they put a debuff on you. What Hex of Whispers does is after hitting 6 times, it comes back to you, and it cleanses all negative effects. And that includes the debuff that the echoes put on you. I'm not sure if this was working as intended or not, but now you don't actually have to worry about getting hit by them. It just removes it right away. This is also going to be a source of fortify for us. We're going to be running Aura of Siphoning. Anytime that we're going to be dealing damage, it's going to heal us for 1% of our maximum life. And then we're going to be running Aura Specialization. That's why this aura is so huge around us. If we take this off, the aura shrinks way, way back down. We put that back on and we get that gigantic ring around us. We're also going to be running the Cycle. Whenever you deal damage, you have 15% chance to grow a flower. It reacts differently when you step on it. If an enemy steps on it, it does damage to them. When activated by an ally, it's also going to heal surrounding allies too. For the runes here, we're going to be running Tam Cry. I love pulls because it pulls everything into you right on top of your earthquakes. So this is going to be the Spirit-Born Vortex every time that we cast 12 non-channeling core skills. And then we're also going to be running Hawk. Spending 50% of our maximum resources is going to grant us our earthquakes. This is going to be your main generator for your earthquakes here. For the mercenaries, we're going to be running Subo. This is going to give us movement speed with direct damage to elites. It will also give us a 25% increase multiplicative damage whenever Subo hits with cover fire. For the reinforcement, we're going to be running Bastion with Rahir. Normally, when we have to pull these big, gigantic groups, I will grab a whole bunch of monsters, pull them into a group, and then I pop Bastion in order to get myself set up, get my buffs up, and not have to worry about dying in that first initial setup phase. So that's it. We're going to go over the gameplay loop so you can see exactly how this plays. For your weapon setup, Hammer of the Ancients will always be your mace. Make sure your Whirlwind is set to your pole arms. This is how we're going to swap back and forth between the two weapons. Now, we talked about soul siphoning. When you use a cooldown next to an enemy, you're going to gain this right here. This is going to be an increase to your strength. Now, if we put multiple enemies around us now, and then we still use another cooldown, if you watch here, we refresh, then when we use this again, our strength didn't actually move, but we gained 5 stacks of it. That is actually really bad, because now we have to wait 10.5 seconds for this to go away. Once it goes away, and then we run back over, if you watch how much damage and how much strength we gain, right here, we go up by quite a bit. So it's a pretty big difference between having one enemy around and having multiple enemies around. When you pull that first initial group, make sure there's a lot of them to take advantage of how much strength that you get. So for this, we're going to hold down the Whirlwind button and then tap Hammer of the Ancients. That's how you swap weapons. When you're on a mouse and keyboard, you hold the Shift key, and then you're going to Whirlwind, and then you're going to tap your Hammer of the Ancients. Every single time that you move, tap Hammer of the Ancients. I like to use this on a controller because it just feels really smooth for me. There's other ways of adjusting your settings on the mouse and keyboard in order to make it feel pretty smooth, but that's pretty much how you run this build. You just want to hold down your Whirlwind button, and then you just press your Hammer of the Ancients button as you go through. Make sure everything stays in front of you, and then you're going to explode all of your earthquakes right in front of you here, just like this. On the bottom here, these are going to be your weapon swaps, so you know exactly where you're at. So every single time that you swap weapons back and forth, you can see them building up. This is your Earth Strikers, and then this is your guaranteed berserking and increased damage. Your weapon expertise is going to be set to your two-handed axe. This is going to give you 10% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. You do not have to have a two-handed axe equipped in order to take advantage of this here. You just put on the technique, you gain that extra 10% increased damage. So that's it. That's the build. Hopefully you enjoy it. Get out there, hit some stuff, blow up some earthquakes. Let me know in the comments what you think. I'm live every night. Stop by, say hi, theorycraft with me. Catch you on the clip side.